Are my parents downstairs? My voice barely came out. My throat burned. My abdomen felt like someone had pulled every muscle apart and stitched it back together, and the recovery room ceiling kept drifting in and out of focus. The nurse leaned closer. Your parents. My mom said she'd be here when I woke up. I turned my head toward the chair beside my bed. Empty. The nurse checked her tablet, then looked at me with the careful expression people use when they're trying not to make bad news worse. Joyce, nobody has checked in as your post-surgery support person. For a few seconds, I thought the anesthesia had scrambled something in my head. That morning, Mom had squeezed my hand before they wheeled me away. I'd admitted I was scared. She sighed and said, Your brother only graduates once. But you'll still be here afterward, right? Of course. Now I was 28 years old, barely able to lift myself from a hospital bed, staring at the chair where my mother had promised to sit. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe Dad had gotten sick. Maybe they had waited until the surgeon said I was safe, then rushed somewhere important. I kept inventing explanations because the alternative made no sense. That evening, a nurse returned my phone. I unlocked it immediately. No missed calls from Mom. None from Dad. There was one text from Caleb. Hope everything went okay. That was it. Then a social media notification appeared. Mom had posted photos. I tapped it. My stomach tightened beneath the bandages. There was Mom beside a sparkling resort pool. Dad stood behind Caleb with one hand on his shoulder. Aunts, cousins, and other relatives crowded around them, smiling beneath palm trees. They weren't at home. They weren't at the hospital. They were hundreds of miles away celebrating Caleb's graduation trip. I checked the timestamp on the first photograph. My hand went still. It had been posted while I was being prepared for surgery. They hadn't left after finding out I was okay. They had already been traveling. I swiped through the pictures until I reached the last one. Mom and Dad were raising their glasses beside Caleb. Underneath it, Mom had written, Glad the whole family made it. I stared at those words from a hospital bed they knew I would wake up in alone. And suddenly, the empty chair beside me wasn't the part that frightened me most. Because if they were already on that trip before my operation even started, there was only one question left. When had my parents actually decided they were going to abandon me? My phone rang at 8:17 the next morning. Mom. I stared at her name before answering. Hi, sweetheart, she said brightly. Music and voices drifted behind her. Feeling better. I had surgery yesterday, Mom. I know, that's why I'm checking. Before I could respond, she continued, You should see this resort, Joyce. Caleb absolutely loves it. Your father found this little restaurant overlooking the water, and tonight we're all. Why didn't you tell me? The noise behind her seemed to disappear. Tell you what? That you were leaving before my surgery. Mom exhaled. Joyce, please don't start. I gripped the blanket. You promised you'd be there when I woke up. The surgery was scheduled. You had excellent doctors. Caleb's graduation trip couldn't just be moved because... I never asked you to move it. Dad's voice suddenly came through the phone. What's going on? Then louder. Joyce, don't turn Caleb's achievement into another family argument. I closed my eyes. I woke up alone, Dad. You were in a hospital, surrounded by professionals. That isn't what Mom promised me. Mom took the phone again. We knew you'd be upset when you found out. I stopped. Not when we told you. When you found out. Mom, what does that mean? Silence. You knew I'd find out afterward. We're not doing this right now. Did you plan to leave before I went into surgery? Someone called Mom's name in the background. We're going to dinner, she said quickly. Get some rest. The call ended. Hours later, discharge created another problem. You need someone to collect you, the nurse explained. I finally called Maya, a coworker I'd known for years. "You're still there?" she asked. "My parents left town." There was a pause. "I'm coming." Maya left work and drove across town to do what my own parents had promised. When I finally reached home, I opened my banking app to check an unrelated notification. Then I saw the charge. A resort payment. The final amount I'd paid after Mom told me they were struggling to afford Caleb's graduation accommodation. I recognized the resort name immediately. It was the same place from Mom's photographs. I stared at the transaction, then opened my laptop. If they had used my money to pay for the trip they abandoned me for, I wanted to know exactly how much. I started pulling every payment I had made. By the second day of my recovery, the family group chat had turned into a non-stop stream of Caleb's graduation photos. I mostly ignored them until Aunt Linda wrote, "Such a shame Joyce couldn't get away from work. We missed you." I sat upright too quickly and winced. "Work?" Before I could respond, another relative replied. "Diane said Joyce was too busy to travel. Hopefully next time, the whole family can really be together." I read it twice. Mom hadn't told them I was having surgery. She had given them a cover story. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Normally, I would have called Mom privately and given her the chance to explain. Not this time. I typed one sentence. I wasn't working. I was having surgery. The chat went completely silent. Then the messages started. "Surgery. Yesterday. Diane, I thought you said she chose not to come." My phone rang. "Mom, what are you doing?" she demanded. "Telling the truth." "Delete that message. Caleb's graduation is not going to become family drama because you're upset." "I'm not deleting anything." "You're embarrassing us." "No, Mom. I said 6 words. Whatever embarrasses you about those 6 words belongs to you." I ended the call. Minutes later, Caleb appeared in the group chat. "Seriously, Joyce, you had to do this during my graduation weekend." I uploaded only my hospital admission date. Uncle Mark responded almost immediately. "Who brought Joyce home after surgery?" Mom jumped in. She had other arrangements. I stared at the screen. Then Maya, who had been added to a smaller family conversation earlier, when Mom needed help organizing Caleb's expenses, saw what was happening. "Joyce called me from the hospital. Nobody had come for her, so I left work and picked her up." The tone changed instantly. Relatives stopped asking me questions. They started asking my parents. Then a private message appeared from Caleb. "You knew this trip was already paid for. What did you expect them to do?" I looked from his message to the resort transactions still open on my laptop. Something about his wording bothered me. He wasn't surprised that Mom and Dad had left early. He sounded like he believed I already knew. I typed slowly. "Caleb, who told you I knew they were leaving early?" Caleb never answered. Instead, his message disappeared. Message deleted. Too late. I had already taken a screenshot. I opened my banking records again and started matching dates. 8 days before my surgery, Mom had called asking for the final resort payment. "We're stretched thin," she'd told me, "and we'll travel once you're safely home, I promise." But the reservation confirmation told a different story. Check-in, the morning of my surgery. I stared at the date. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. They had known. Then I found Mom's old text. "Caleb's celebration is getting more expensive than expected. Could you cover the remaining accommodation? We'll make it up to you." I had paid it without hesitation. My phone buzzed. A cousin had messaged me privately. "Joyce, I think you need to see something." Screenshots followed. They were from another family group chat. A graduation trip chat. Everyone traveling with Caleb seemed to be there. Except me. I scrolled until I reached messages sent several days before my operation. Mom was discussing departure times. Dad was confirming luggage arrangements. Then Caleb had written, "Does Joyce know?" Mom replied, "We'll tell her afterward. Otherwise she'll get emotional and make us feel guilty about leaving." Dad responded, "Agreed, better this way." My thumb stopped moving. There were more messages below, but I couldn't read them yet. I saved every screenshot instead. Then I opened my banking app. For years, I'd sent my parents money automatically every month to help with household expenses. I pressed * cancel recurring transfer. Next, I opened the travel account connected to Caleb's remaining expenses. I removed myself as backup payer. For once, I didn't call Mom first. I didn't warn Dad. I didn't rescue Caleb. I simply stopped paying. 3 minutes later, Mom's name appeared on my screen. Before I could answer, another notification dropped across the top of my phone. Payment declined, remaining hotel balance. Mom kept calling. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I went back to the screenshots my cousin had sent and read the messages I'd stopped myself from reading before. There it was. The entire timeline. Mom and Dad had known days before my surgery that they were leaving that morning. Caleb knew too. Mom had even written, "Don't tell Joyce until afterward. If she knows, she'll ask one of us to stay." Another message explained their plan perfectly. Leave quietly, let the hospital handle me, then apologize when they returned. And Caleb had known I was helping pay for the resort. I checked my statements one final time. The numbers matched. Part of the trip, my family had abandoned me had been funded by me. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "Joyce," Mom snapped, "the hotel payment was declined." I almost laughed. So money makes me important enough to call. "This isn't funny. Restore the payment." "No." Dad's voice came through the speaker. "Stop being childish." I opened the screenshots. "Mom, should I read something to you?" Silence. I read her own words aloud. "Don't tell Joyce until afterward." Nobody spoke. Then Dad finally said, "Caleb deserved one weekend where everything centered around him." "I never asked you to cancel his graduation." "You're certainly ruining it now," Mom said. "No, I asked you to keep one promise. Sit beside me when I woke up." Caleb grabbed the phone. "You're punishing everybody over one mistake." "A mistake?" I looked at the dates lined up across my screen. "A mistake happens unexpectedly, Caleb. This had reservations, departure times, messages, lies, and then Mom told everyone I stayed home because of work." He had nothing to say. I continued. "And you knew." Another silence. That told me everything I needed. "I'm not restoring the payment," I said, "and the monthly transfers to Mom and Dad are finished too." Mom's voice sharpened. "You can't suddenly do that to us." I just did. They had to settle the remaining hotel balance themselves. But the financial consequences weren't what changed the family most. The screenshots did. I sent them to the relatives who had been told I voluntarily skipped Caleb's trip because I was working. I included the hospital admission date and the resort payment records. Nothing more was necessary. Aunt Linda called Mom. Then Uncle Mark did. Relatives who had been smiling in those photographs started asking why nobody had told them I was undergoing surgery. Mom tried saying I was jealous of Caleb. That argument collapsed the moment everyone learned I had helped finance his celebration. One aunt put it plainly. "She paid toward the trip, Diane, and you left her in a hospital." For once, Mom couldn't control how the family interpreted what happened. And I stopped trying to protect her from that. During the rest of my recovery, Maya checked on me regularly. A few relatives brought groceries, drove me to follow-up appointments, or simply sat with me. Those ordinary acts changed something in me. I had spent years believing being dependable meant never making anyone uncomfortable. It didn't. Sometimes it meant saying no. The automatic payments stayed canceled. I stopped covering Caleb's expenses. And whenever Mom made a promise, I stopped building my plans around it. Months later, my body had healed. My relationship with my family hadn't returned to what it was before, and I no longer wanted it to. Mom and Dad still contacted me occasionally. I answered when I wanted to. I ended conversations when they became manipulative. Reconciliation was no longer something they could demand because we shared a last name. Caleb graduated. That achievement remained his. But it could never again be used as an excuse for what they had done. I kept one screenshot from that weekend. Mom and Dad raising their glasses beside Caleb. Glad the whole family made it. I used to look at those words and see proof that I had been erased. Now I saw something else. A line separating the life where I accepted whatever place my family gave me from the life where I chose my own. I woke from surgery staring at an empty chair, but I stopped spending my life saving seats for people who had already chosen to leave mine empty.